We're continuing our discussion about contemplative practice, contemplative prayer. Let me suggest some things that we've talked about that I think we've kind of gleaned from what we've been looking at. And this is how contemplative practice / contemplative prayer, call it meditation, call it mindfulness, call it the practice of stillness and silence. I mean, it can go by a lot of different terms. We read from James Finley that anything can become a contemplative practice: baking bread, gardening, taking walks in the park, anything that a space where you can connect with a sense of the transcendent, right? A sense of the presence of God. And here's some of the things that I think are pertinent about how this changes us. One is we learn to be present, just to be present in the moment, right? Instead of worrying about the past or projecting out to the future, which we do. We do a lot of that. We almost have to do a lot of that. But when you take this time for some contemplative practice of some sort or prayer, part of what we're doing is just being simply present in the moment, right? To remind ourselves that all of that is not nearly as important as maybe it seems. Another thing we see is that the present is sacred. This moment is holy, right? And it's not holy because I happen to be in church or something. It's just holy because it's of God, right? That's part of what we're remembering. We're being reminded of. Our lives are full of hustle and bustle and demands and concerns, and we're doing things and addressing things. But when we stop and take some sort of pause, the thing to remember is this is a holy moment, just like they all are, right? And in remembering that this is a holy moment, there's also the sense of, and I am holy. Now, we have to get away from the idea that holiness has to do with moral uprightness. I like the phrase that says, holy people are those who know they're not. Think about that. Holy people are those who know they're not. In other words, in the moral sense of, I've done everything right. No, those are self-righteous people. They aren't actually holy. They're just self-righteous. Holy people are the people who are like the tax collector in Jesus' parable, who won't even lift his eyes up to heaven, but beats on his chest and says, Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. He goes home justified. He's a holy person. Not because he's morally upright, but because he knows he's not a holy person. Ironically, that makes him a holy person. Right? We have to change our idea about holiness. Holiness is not people who never make mistakes. Holiness is descriptive of people who know they make mistakes and readily admit them. They're holy people, not because they lack sin, but because they honestly confess their sinfulness and they remain humble, and they know that their holiness doesn't have to do with their behavior. It has to do with God's work, right? So when we're doing this contemplative practice, so we're taking a break from all of this. It might only be for 5 minutes, it might be for 15 minutes, but it's remembering to be present, that God is present, that this moment is holy, that I'm holy. But that's because God makes me holy, right? Because I'm a child of God, and that's not going to be ruined by the fact that, I've already blown it today because I got frustrated, I got angry, and I was short with someone. Okay, well, in that moment, I still remember, but I'm holy, right? Despite what's happened. Part of what we'll talk about is there's a way where we are listening to God in that contemplative space, in that meditative space. We're listening to God. Now, we've got to talk about what that looks like or what that means or our expectations about that. Doesn't necessarily mean audible voices or something. Not saying it couldn't, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. But we're listening to God. And what we are able to do is to discern more where God is at work. How we are able to discern what is God doing in my life, in the world around me, and then to be able to join him there. Join him in the work in my life. If I can discern what God is doing with me, then I can join him in cooperatively welcoming that work in myself, or what God's doing around me in my world. So we're listening to God, and what comes out of that is this ability to discern more readily what God's doing, what God's about, and join him there. I think there's this idea of self-awareness that comes from contemplative practice, knowing ourselves better in that silent space. We come to realize perhaps some things about ourselves. And maybe finally, I would mention a sense of peace and perspective. We like the alliteration, two P's, peace and perspective. A kind of serenity, despite all the chaos. I take a little break and I realize there is a grounding peace here, even if I'm having to deal with a lot of things that are, hectic. But if I take that time and space, I can see that there's a place of peace, and I can gain some perspective. Things like this too will pass. This is not eternal. Yes, I'm having to deal with something, but there are more substantial things that ground me. Okay, so those are some of the things I would say that we benefit. We benefit in those ways from contemplative practice, and there may be more. You probably could add to that list. I don't know. So, you got any thoughts or comments on that part of what I was going to share? All right. So now let's talk about nonverbal prayer. And so I said when we started off that, and the question I was asked to deal with is contemplative prayer, but I broadened it to say, well, contemplative practice. The other thing we're actually saying is all contemplative practice is prayer. So when James Finley said, none of your contemplative practice is gardening, well, then your gardening is prayer. See, that's the point. If we've got this idea of verbal prayer, like prayer is when I bow my head, close my eyes, put my hands together, and then say a bunch of things, either out loud or in my head, I'm talking to God. If that's our only definition of prayer, well, we've limited ourselves in an extraordinary way. Basically, everything can become prayer, and anything undertaken with an intention towards this meditative practice is a deliberate prayer. I mean, that's praying. But it's not verbal prayer where I'm talking to God. It's this prayer of space where I'm quiet and I'm listening to God. And then I'm hearing things that might help me have a better self-awareness, a better self-understanding. I'm listening, and in my listening, I hear God telling me, you're loved, and I'm here, and all will be well. I hear those kinds of things. I'm not saying I hear a voice necessarily, but in the stopping of all the hecticness and taking a moment just to breathe and to reflect, those are the things that come to mind, right? And I think that lots of times the things that come to mind are the things that God is telling us. Doesn't mean everything that comes to mind is what God is telling us, but some of the things that come to mind are what God is telling us. We have to discern those, right? So we're talking about a nonverbal prayer. And we can undertake this in a lot of ways. I'll talk about some of them. You may have had experience or read about things or practiced other things, and please bring those up, because there's no way I can be exhausted. So I'll give a few examples, right? So when we're doing nonverbal prayer, where we're not talking to God, I'm not telling God anything. I'm not praising God. I'm not petitioning God. I'm not asking for anything. What I have to do is I have to do something with my restless mind. Because as soon as you try and calm your mind down, what you'll start to realize is my mind won't be calm. If you say, let me just stop and just stop thinking about everything. What happens is you start thinking about everything, right? And as soon as you just try and relax and and empty your mind from all your worries, tomorrow's to-do list, that issue, it just starts coming right back in. And so we acknowledge the fact that our minds are resting. And the goal of this is not to somehow achieve some state in which I have stopped my mind from thinking of all the things it wants to run to. It's restless. That is an impossible task. So what we want to do in meditation or contemplation or some stillness is we have to give the mind a task that focuses us on stillness, right? Because you can't just empty your mind. It will come up with something, right? So we can focus our mind on something that will keep us in this place of stillness. So here are some possibilities. One is you could just focus on your own breathing. You can concentrate. That's called breath prayer. So what you're doing is you find this calm place to sit, and you sit, and you try and push away all the worries about yesterday, today, and regrets and issues, and you just will try and settle your mind on your own breathing. And so you're focusing there. You're inhaling and exhaling calmly, just trying to be in the moment. And this mind that wants to go every time it starts to run and remember something you need to do, you just try and bring it back and focus it on your breathing. So we have to realize we're going to fail at this, and that's not a bad thing, right? You can't put your mind completely at rest. So we don't need to get discouraged when that happens. We just need to realize, okay, just gently bring my mind back to the moment, to the present moment, and just focus on being calm and breathing and letting the world go away for a few minutes, right? So that's one way. And you say, well, then what's happening? Well, in that more calm space where you're trying to push away all the chaos and all the thought, when we practice it, we find, not always, but sometimes in that space, a thought does come that is not the chaos, restless mind, but it sounds more like it could be a whisper from God, right? And that one you don't push away. That one you go, that wasn't the to-do list. That wasn't my worry. It was something else. And it seemed to be coming to me because I stopped being so engaged in so much going on that in the stillness, I had a thought. And maybe it was a thought about something like, it could be a thought like someone comes to mind and you think, maybe I ought to just touch base with that person. Maybe I ought to do that. Or something about yourself comes to mind. And then you entertain that a little bit, right? But that's not your mind running back to your busyness. That's something that can happen. Now, if it doesn't happen, no problem, right? Contemplation is not a goal to be achieved. It's just a space to be in. And as some have described it, you may receive a gift. And if you receive a gift, be thankful for the gift. But it's not like, that was a waste because I didn't get any gift. God didn't speak to me. I'm such a driven to do person that I'm not going to spend 15 minutes if I'm not going to get something out of it. Then God may be silent for a long, long time until you finally give in and say, I'll spend 15 minutes doing this, whether anything comes of it or not. See what I'm hinting at? God may withhold that until you finally give in to, okay, whatever you want, Lord. Because I was trying to make this space. I mean, this is ironically, we could say, I'm going to make my contemplation be what I want it to be. God lovingly made this, let it be silent until you finally surrender and say, okay, let the contemplation be what you want it to be. I'll stop trying to dictate. I'll get back to listening. See how easily we can get into, but we're going to control the dialogue, we're going to control the agenda. We just have to let the meditation be whatever God wants it to be. And if we get something, we do. Okay, so other things you can do with your restless mind. One is breath. Another is to focus on a phrase, repeating a phrase. So there's the Pilgrim's Prayer, which is taken from the story of the publican going up to the temple to pray. And basically it's called the Pilgrim's Prayer. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of the living God, have mercy on me, a sinner. You can actually repeat that over and over to yourself in time with your breathing, keeping your mind focused on how Jesus is Lord, how he is merciful, right? I mean, so even the words that you're repeating, helping you not run off and think about all these other things, is keeping you focused. And those then become a focus of your contemplation. As you repeat that gently to yourself, rhythmically, over and over, you're just trying to live into those words. And that's keeping the mind from wanting to go back to business, go back to stuff, right? Or you can pick other phrases. You can use verses. You can use the phrase, be still and know that I am Lord. That phrase. You could, God is love. You could pick anything and put your mind on that and then say that to yourself slowly over and over to help focus you in this place of peace. That makes sense? What others?
Time myself counting heartbeats in breath.
Okay.
Sometimes getting all clear.
Yeah, people worry about falling asleep in prayer, and I'm like, what better way to fall asleep? Why are you upset? What were you, again, it's like, but I failed. I was praying and I went to sleep. We're too success oriented. Like, what were you, but that wasn't what it was supposed to happen. You're not resting in prayer, let it be what if you fall asleep, great. No problem. Yeah, something else kind of like along that line is bodily awareness. Sometimes what you can do is just you sit and you just think through each part of your body. You relax this. Start with the left arm. Relax the left arm. Relax the forearm. Relax the hand. Just let it rest. Let it feel heavy. Then the right hand. And you just kind of think through your whole body and just try and focus on each part of letting it rest, letting it relax, letting the tension go out. Right. Again, you got to give the mind something to do, but you're giving it that to do, right? Thinking through how you're actually resting. You can do that. And you might do that first. And then, when you feel like you've fully gotten into a place of rest like that, then you may start focusing either on the breathing or repeating a phrase, because you've kind of gone through that part. But all of it's about slowing down, being still, and letting God's peace come to us, right? Because even the peace we feel in that just relax for a few minutes, that's the peace of God, right? That's what you got to realize. I felt relaxed. That's God, and that's God letting you rest, and you're just tapping into that for a few moments. Yeah,
My sister died in July. And this month, I woke up at like 1 in the morning, simply could not go back to sleep. So I've done this before, so it came to mind that I just needed to lay still and ask God, what's going on? It's racing. I go to sleep. What am I feeling? And it was anxiety and the fact I needed to breathe. And so I asked God, I said, perhaps that's what it is, God. If I need to grieve, then be with me. And I get. And then I rolled over. It was good.
Yeah. That's a great example. I think that's an example of self-awareness coming at that point. And I think of God speaking to us. In something like that, where we open ourselves up to listen, what is it? And then something comes to mind. It always, I wouldn't dismiss it. I wouldn't immediately latch onto it, but you can consider it. If it sounds like it would be of God, then there's a good chance it is, right? So you ask that question, you open yourself up to what is Lord, and then something comes to mind. Well, consider that. I mean, really consider that, because is that God putting that thought? We're very accustomed to the idea that temptations are thoughts that can be put into our head. I remember realizing, why don't we think God puts thoughts in our heads? I mean, I grew up believing the devil put thoughts in our heads. No one really ever said that God was doing it. We were deriving the instructions from God from the Bible, right? Which is not bad, but we were like, go to the Bible to get the thoughts of God, but the devil's planting them in your head. And it started occurring to me, well, why can't God also be putting thoughts into your head? Now, the urge to do something good, the urge to be kind or mindful of someone's need. Seems to me that God is doing that as well. Right? So, okay, that's a good example. Any other thoughts?
I Googled it, it said time in nature,
Time in nature?
which I have done up on top of Sheep Hall,
Yeah.
watching the sunset. And then contemplative prayer. Not wanting anything to be ahead, I just play Christian
Yeah.
random song.
Yeah, we can do visual prayer. Because again, the standard thing is verbal prayer, where I'm talking to God. There's nothing wrong with that. There's a place for that. I'm not saying don't ever do that. I'm saying we do that. It's what we learn to do at first, and it's fine. But if that remains our whole repertoire, we're going to be very impoverished in our prayer life. So visual prayer, like you're saying, you could go to a scenic spot. And again, what do you do with your restless mind? You go ahead and focus very intentionally on what you're seeing. I tell people this when I'm, sometimes when I'm trying to help somebody, I said, you cannot think about two things at once. We think we can. Oh, I can multitask. No. No one actually thinks about two things at once. What they do is they might have 7 things and they think about them in sequence over and over and over. They're not actually multitasking. They're just going in sequence, and they're kind of keeping all these balls in the air at the same time. So you can't think about 2 things at once. But the mind's going to think about something. One of the ancient church fathers said it's like a millstone, driven by a water wheel. It's as long as the stream's running, they didn't have a clutch or disengaging system. The thing was just always turning. He said you can either grind wheat or you can grind weeds. Your mind is like the millstone. It's always turning. It's just only question what you can put in there. Right. And so that was the analogy one of these desert fathers was using is, okay, so the mind's always going, but like you're saying, you can go in nature and then you could say, I'm just actually going to focus on the trees and the birds and the sky. And again, I can't think about that and worry about all my worries or things like that. my mind can only do one thing at a time. And if I stay there, and as soon as I find it starting to stray, I bring it back. Yeah, Carol?
Sometimes I will do that and just kind of incorporate your five senses, and you can do, I've heard this thing called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you think about 5 things you see, 4 things you hear, 3 things you feel, and sometimes the taste can be kind of hard. Sometimes it's trying to have something to taste, and then
Or something you smell? Yeah.
it sometimes smell, but it kind of gives you a way to like use your senses to
Yeah.
only focus on
Yeah. See, now that's, again, I like that. Never heard that. But again, that will keep you focused on the moment, on where you are right now. And it's a calming sort of exercise. And it's a self-aware exercise. What am I feeling? What am I hearing? What am I seeing? I think I've never heard that, but that's a good exercise. It's a good way. Again, just think about it. That'll let you calm down and then get to that more restful space, right? Which is what we need.
I was thinking of something similar back when I could take walks on local ground. I would like to walk in the early morning hours when it was dark. And sometimes there would be other people out, but that's rare. But I would spend time in prayer, and I would thank God for my senses. And with each sense, I would focus on that and see, like, if I was thanking God for my ears and that I could hear, that I would spend time listening. Sometimes there were cars, sometimes there were birds singing. There might be someone else walking up your steps.
Steps getting closer behind.
And so I would thank
You start
God.
worrying about things.
Yeah.
You don't need to worry about.
And then I would go to, smell and sometimes there would be wisteria blooming, and that would smell so good. And then I would go to all the senses, and then I would end up with touch and the ability to feel the touch. And so many times the wind would blow and I would feel that wind.
Yeah.
And I would feel so close to God, and I would thank him. Thank you for sending that.
Yeah. That's a beautiful example. We have to cultivate that kind of imagination. And I don't mean imagination like it's not real. I mean a way of perceiving what is real. Because it'd be easy to dismiss, well, that wind was just a random event of air pressure and temperature, or it was God, right? Right. And I'm much more of the mindset, we live in an enchanted world. We live in a sacred world. God is present, but God is not screaming at us, and he's not using a bullhorn. And he is in the gentle and the silent, because he's a lot more humble and weak than we think. So when Paul says, when I am weak, then I am strong, he's saying more than my human weakness is then a time for the strength of God. He's also saying the strength of God is not human strength. The strength of God is not what we think of as strength at all, because God is strongest on the cross, which is not by any measure human strength. It isn't. And that's God revealing himself. And we say, well, God is the God of all power. Yeah, but what power are we thinking of? We're thinking about the power to crush and manipulate and force and control. And God is not that God of power. He's the God of the power to love. And he's able to love absolutely everything, everyone, everywhere, all the time. It's an extraordinary power, and he is powerful. But I think, so all that I'm saying is, yes, when I get quiet, when I get silent, when I stop all the noise in my head, then I can be open, and I need to be open to the idea that the wind is God's spirit touching me, assuring me, Because I think one of the messages that we hear in those moments is, or that we ought to be hearing, is the words of the Father to Jesus at his baptism. You are my beloved, in you I am well pleased. He is saying that incessantly to each one of us, which is why I said beloved, not beloved son. You are my beloved, and in you and with you I am delighted. When if I quiet down and I feel guilty and horrible about myself, I think that's the one they call the accuser. That's not God. God knows I make all kinds of mistakes. He forgives all those. He then tells me, I love you and I delight in you. Yeah, I know the mistakes, but I forgive those. That's easy to do. I delight in you, and I delight in you becoming more and more one who is in fellowship with me. So in that quiet time, if what comes up are feeling, are thoughts of guilt and feelings of shame and stuff, I tell you, that is not God in that space. That's someone else in that space trying to make you feel awful. And you need to push those thoughts away and focus on, like repeating the phrase, God is love, or I am God's beloved, in whom he is well pleased. I am God's beloved, in whom he is well pleased. Now, visual prayer, I was starting to mention visual prayer. Visual prayer is where I simply envision, and for people who are visually oriented, this might actually be easier than some other thing. So instead of a verbal prayer where I'm saying anything, just picture, and people have said things like, I picture myself as a child climbing up into the lap of God. So I picture God, and picture God as whatever would represent to you the most loving, caring individual. And it may be someone you know, which is fine. Picture God as that person. You know, maybe it was you had a wonderful grandmother who always gave you marvelous hugs, and her house was filled with good smells, and you love going there as a child. Picture your grandmother as God, and you're climbing up into your grandmother's lap. And then you think through, and what do you feel? You feel utterly secure, you feel embraced, you feel loved, you feel valued. You're a child, and children aren't worrying about anything, right? You know, they've yet to grow up and be worried about the stock market, all these sorts of things. So, in other words, that'd be a visual prayer. It doesn't have to be climbing up into the lap of God, as it were. It could be anything, but you visualize it, and then you put your restless mind into the work of seeing the scene, thinking about the scene, thinking about what you feel in that moment and what it means to you, right? That again can be a way you focus this restless mind, you push away everything else, and you just visualize a space. And the message has to be positive. The message has to be positive. Yeah.
When we reflect upon things that could have been done better, let's put it that way. We won't call them mistakes. But when we reflect upon those, my question would be, if we don't make that part of what we do on a frequent, daily, and recurrent basis, how are we then to avoid making that?
Yeah, there's a real good place for that. It's not contemplation. But I think there's real wisdom in a kind of self-examination. So there's a practice, I think it's a Jesuit practice, where at the end of the day, a person, there's 5 steps to it. I think it's called acumen, or not acumen, something similar. I have to look up the word, but it's a name they give to this practice. And what you do is you think over the day. And it's the same wisdom. You think over the day, and first you think of, well, what did I do wrong? I mean, let's not be in denial. Let's be honest. What did I do wrong? You think about what those are, and you ask for forgiveness, and you make note. Okay, because tomorrow's going to be a new day. I get to start over. Tomorrow is a brand new creation. Today will be gone. Tomorrow is a brand new creation. Tonight is kind of a death, and in the morning I'm resurrected to start anew. And that's the mentality. Today won't matter after that. So the first reflection is, what did I do wrong? And make some notes of that, which is exactly what you're saying. What could I do better? What I need to be aware of? But then you think about, where was God present? You've got to intentionally look for that. Well, it was in this kindness that I experienced, or this that I saw, or a thought, or a song, or where was God speaking to me today? Yeah. You go through that part. But the final part is the contemplative part, is that the final part is just to envision yourself being loved by God. And this is a practice you do before you go to sleep. Right? But by looking at the day and seeing what was wrong, you're going to go ahead and kind of put it aside. You're going to say, okay, make note of that, deal with that. But I'm also realizing I'm forgiven for that, but I need to make the note that, yeah. And, and if you're self-aware, yeah, and that's, I got to watch for that, because I'm liable to do that. Right? That's my habit, it's easily done. But then you're thinking about, where did I see God? And you're finishing with this idea, and I am loved. God delights in me. All is well with me and God. And in that sense, with me and the world. So you kind of let go and you move on. And the next morning you get up and you start afresh. So that what you're talking about is important, but I would not put that into the contemplation itself. The contemplation is more of the, I am loved. I'm creating a space. Then in the contemplation, you may get an awareness. Something may pop up and you become, I would say, by the Spirit of God, aware of a flaw, that just kind of creeps up there, and you have to consider, is God telling me something that I need to be more aware of?
Are we going another week on this topic?
Oh, yeah.
Because we're gonna start, I was gonna say music, so I'll look at the sunset
Yeah.
and then do music. I think music.
Yeah, music.
Driving in the car and you start doing negative thoughts.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell, I'll punch on Spotify, 5,000 Christian songs.
See, I just listen to classic.
Every new one.
I listen to classic rock and roll, and for me, that is a contemplative space. I mean, because it really is, because it just, for me, it is. It really is. I like having music on. It's a grounding sort of thing for me. It reminds me that there's more than just the moment, and whatever the moment of chaos is. This is kind of if you come here during the week, I've often got music playing in my office. I work to music.
That makes me feel better, because I was thinking that my Zen on my bike rides would sound weird, but it is.
No, of
And I'm
course.
there for just hammer.
No.
If one Christian song doesn't work, then you put in Top Gun.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's like what James Finley is saying. Virtually anything can become a contemplative practice. I don't want to limit it to it's only this narrow set of activities. And if those don't seem to fit you, I guess you're just not spiritual. Then you're like, well, I guess that's not for me. No, anything can be. Someone was telling me last week, and I'll stop here. Someone was telling me when I was talking about contemplative practice, this person said, on my morning commute to work, I stay in the right lane to remind myself I'm not in control. Right? I know exactly what this, because I can be one of those people who wants to start just weaving in and out, and then by the time I get stopped at a light, here comes the person, who's now 2 car lengths behind me. Oh, wow, he lost a few feet, to me, who's been really intensely driving.
For contemplation.
Red left lane is, I'm mad about somebody.
But see that,
Road rage.
right, but that's the point. The point is that too if you engage it intentionally, can become a practice of, I'm gonna stay calm, I'm just gonna drive, I'm not gonna get caught up in competing with the other drivers for who can get, it can change our world, right? It's a contemplative state, it can change our world, right? So it can virtually be anything. Well, thank you for thought. Yeah, we're gonna continue talking about it next week.
Okay.